Billionaire entered the court with divorce papers, until his wife arrived holding their newborn baby. The divorce papers trembled in David Budd's hands as he prepared to end his marriage forever. But when the courtroom doors burst open, his wife Johanna stepped inside, cradling their newborn daughter Amara. The billionaire who had built an empire on calculated moves suddenly found himself facing the one variable he couldn't control: a baby who represented everything he was about to destroy. What happens when power, betrayal, and an innocent child collide in front of the world's cameras? If you're enjoying this story, click subscribe. Like this video and comment what time it is that you're watching this video. Now, let's get back to the story. The morning of April 12, 2025, began like a storm building in the distance. Quiet, heavy, inevitable. The Supreme Court of Manhattan loomed against the gray sky, its stone facade glistening from a drizzle that had passed hours earlier. Reporters swarmed outside the courthouse steps, their cameras ready to capture a moment that was already being whispered about as history in the making. Inside a black limousine, billionaire industrialist David Budd sat with his palms pressed together, the weight of the divorce papers resting on his lap. His legal team murmured final instructions, but their words washed over him like static. He wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the embossed cover of the folder, the one that with a single signature would end nearly a decade of marriage. David exhaled slowly, staring at his reflection in the tinted glass. His face looked older than his 43 years, carved with fatigue from months of litigation, sleepless nights, and scandal. Once hailed as the face of American innovation, he had become the embodiment of greed and corruption after the whistleblower leaks of March 2024. His empire still stood, but the foundations trembled. What he was about to do today, finalize his divorce, wasn't just personal, it was strategic. If he could sever ties with Johanna before she became a legal threat, before she was weaponized by shareholders, journalists, or federal investigators, then maybe, just maybe, he could keep his fortune intact. "Mr. Budd," his attorney said softly, "it's time." David nodded, his throat dry. The doors of the limousine opened, and a flurry of camera shutters erupted as he stepped out. He didn't flinch. He had been trained for moments like this. Back straight, jaw set, stride confident. But beneath the facade, his stomach churned. Inside the courthouse, the air was cool and humming with quiet anticipation. The mahogany-paneled courtroom, with its tall windows and American flag draped near the bench, was already filled with spectators, reporters, and a few prominent onlookers. A billionaire's divorce was never private. It was theater. David took his seat at the plaintiff's table. He placed the divorce folder neatly before him, aligning it with the edge of the table as though precision could steady his nerves. He glanced briefly at the bench where the judge, an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes, shuffled through documents. Then the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Every head turned. Johanna Budd stepped through, her navy suit hugging her tall, graceful frame. Her expression was unreadable, composed, almost regal, but in her arms she carried something that transformed the entire room. A newborn swaddled in soft white cloth. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The reporters scrambled to adjust their cameras, capturing the sight that none of them had predicted. Johanna, the estranged wife, wasn't alone. She brought their child, the baby the world barely knew existed. David's chest tightened. His eyes locked on the tiny figure nestled against her. For a moment he couldn't breathe. The baby, his daughter. Johanna walked with steady steps, her gaze fixed on him. Not the judge, not the gallery, not the flashing cameras. Him. Her eyes pierced through the courtroom like blades, carrying years of betrayal, hurt and defiance, but also something else, something he couldn't name. She reached the defense table, adjusted the baby in her arms, and sat down. The courtroom had fallen into a stunned silence. Even the judge paused, peering over his glasses. David's attorney leaned toward him, whispering urgently, "This changes nothing. We stay the course." But David wasn't listening. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the child. Her tiny hands curled into fists, her lips parting with soft breaths. The reality of her presence hit him like a blow. This was Amara, his blood, his legacy, his future, and he had come here to erase her mother. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Budd, Mrs. Budd, this is highly unusual." Johanna adjusted her grip on the baby, her voice calm yet sharp. "Your Honor, I'm not here for theatrics. I'm here because the truth of this marriage isn't in those papers he's holding. It's in this child." The room erupted again. Murmurs, whispers, cameras clicking. David felt the sweat bead at his temple. He tried to summon the resolve that had carried him through boardroom battles, hostile takeovers, and congressional hearings. But this was different. This wasn't about stock prices or reputation. This was about the life he had created and nearly abandoned. The judge looked at David. "Mr. Budd, are you prepared to proceed today?" David's lips parted, but no words came out. He glanced down at the papers before him, the ink waiting for his signature, then back at Johanna and the child in her arms. His heart pounded so hard it drowned out the noise of the courtroom. For the first time in years, David Budd, the billionaire who controlled empires, didn't know what to do. And the world was watching. The silence in the courtroom was not the kind that comforted. It was taut, drawn like the string of a bow before release. Outside, the April drizzle thickened into rain, streaking the windows of the Supreme Court of Manhattan. But inside, the storm had already arrived. Johanna's presence, with the newborn swaddled against her chest, had undone weeks, no, months of preparation. David could feel his attorneys bristling beside him, their carefully crafted strategy unraveling in real time. The documents stacked neatly before him suddenly felt like weapons turned against their wielder. "Mr. Budd," the judge said again, his voice steady, unyielding, "we cannot proceed until I am satisfied both parties are fit to do so. Do you wish to continue today?" David's throat was dry. He adjusted his tie, buying seconds that felt like hours. Finally, he spoke, though his voice betrayed the tremor in his chest. "Yes, Your Honor, I am here to proceed." He expected Johanna to flinch, to show some sign of defeat. Instead, she smirked, barely perceptible, but enough to slice through him. She knew him too well. She knew that bravado was a mask. Her attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Daniels, rose from the defense table. "Your Honor, before proceedings begin, I'd like to state for the record that the existence of a minor child necessitates reconsideration of the settlement terms previously proposed by Mr. Budd's counsel. We cannot, in good conscience, continue with an agreement that pretends this child does not exist." The room erupted, reporters scribbling furiously, whispers darting through the gallery like sparks. David's lead attorney, a polished man named Richard Holt, rose to counter. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the birth of a child does not alter the essential fact of irreconcilable differences between these parties. Mr. Budd has the right to dissolve his marriage," Patricia cut in sharply, "but it does alter the obligations, financial, emotional, and otherwise. This child is the living testament of this union. We are not just talking about a dissolution, we are talking about a legacy." The judge leaned back in his chair, hands steepled. His gaze shifted between David and Johanna, lingering on the sleeping infant. The pause stretched long enough for the courtroom's collective heartbeat to quicken. "Very well," he said at last. "We will hear arguments on this matter before proceeding with the divorce." David's stomach sank. He hadn't anticipated this. He had envisioned a swift, clinical severing of ties. Now, the battlefield had shifted. Johanna rose slowly, adjusting the baby in her arms. Her eyes never left David's as she began to speak. "When I met him," she said, her voice carrying the clarity of memory, "he wasn't just a billionaire. He was a man who told me he believed in justice, in fairness, in making the world better than he found it. That's the man I married in July of 2018. That's the man I thought I was building a life with." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. Even the reporters seemed to lean closer. But somewhere along the way, that man disappeared, replaced by someone who would rather protect his empire than his family. Someone who forgot that power means nothing if you lose the people you claim to love. David's jaw clenched. He wanted to object, to call it manipulation. Yet the words struck too close to truth. He shifted in his chair, avoiding her gaze. Patricia gestured toward the baby. And now there is Amara. She didn't choose to be born into scandal. She didn't choose to be the daughter of a man the press calls a profiteer. But she deserves parents who can rise above their pride and their grudges. She deserves better than these papers. David felt a prickle of heat in his chest. He had come prepared to fight Johanna, to discredit her, to free himself. But how did one fight against a child's innocence? How did one argue against the sight of one's own blood, fragile and perfect, sleeping just feet away? Richard placed a hand on David's arm. "Stay focused," he whispered. "She's playing the crowd. This is emotional theater, nothing more." But it wasn't just theater, it was memory. David's mind pulled him back, unbidden, to the night of August 12th, 2024. The hospital room had smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. Johanna, exhausted but glowing, had handed him the baby wrapped in a blanket. For the first time in years he had cried. He had whispered her name, Amara, and felt something stir in him that no boardroom victory ever had. He had promised himself he would be better. For her, for Johanna. But promises were easy. Keeping them had always been harder. The judge rapped his gavel lightly. "We will adjourn for 30 minutes. Both parties may use this time to reconsider their positions in light of today's development." As the courtroom buzzed with chatter, David sank back into his chair. His hands trembled slightly, though he hid them beneath the table. His attorneys immediately huddled, strategizing, but he barely heard them. His eyes were locked on Johanna, who rocked Amara gently, her expression unreadable. When the judge exited, David stood abruptly. Ignoring the cameras, ignoring the whispers, he crossed the aisle. His attorneys hissed warnings, but he didn't care. He stopped in front of Johanna. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Finally, he spoke, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Why did you bring her here?" Johanna met his gaze, unflinching. "Because you were about to erase us, and I won't let you pretend she doesn't exist." His throat tightened. "This isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," she snapped softly. "The whole world is watching. Let them see the man you've become." Her words cut deep, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Before he could respond, a bailiff stepped in to maintain order, urging both parties to return to their tables. But the damage was done. David returned to his seat shaken, his resolve crumbling. The rain outside hammered harder against the windows as though the city itself bore witness. And somewhere in that storm, David realized the truth he had tried to deny. This wasn't just about money or reputation anymore. This was about whether he would remain the man Johanna once believed in, or cement himself as the man she now despised. The decision was no longer just his, it was Amara's. The rain outside hadn't let up. Thunder rolled faintly over the Manhattan skyline, the kind of storm that seemed choreographed by fate itself. Inside the courthouse, though, the true tempest churned within the walls of the judge's chambers where both legal teams had been summoned during the recess. David sat at a long oak conference table, his attorneys flanking him like generals. Across from them sat Johanna, her attorney Patricia, and the baby carrier at her side. The baby stirred occasionally, emitting soft whimpers that carried louder weight than any shouted argument. Every time the sound rose, David's chest constricted, his rehearsed speeches dissolving into ash. "Mr. Budd," Patricia began, her tone precise, every syllable like a gavel strike. "This case is no longer solely about divorce. There's a child involved, a child whose welfare and future will be scrutinized by the court. Attempting to push through a clean break as if she doesn't exist would not only be legally reckless, it would be catastrophic for your reputation." Richard Holt, David's attorney, interjected swiftly. "Let's not exaggerate. The child will be provided for. Mr. Budd is prepared to establish a generous trust fund, ensure health care, education, even property inheritance. What we cannot allow is for the presence of this infant to derail the primary objective, dissolution of this marriage." Johanna leaned forward, her eyes like sharpened steel. "You think you can throw money at this? This isn't about trust funds or estates. This is about responsibility, about a father who's been so consumed by his empire he forgot the empire of his own home." Her words stung, not least because they echoed his own secret fears. The room grew thick with tension. Even the judge's clerk, who had been dutifully taking notes, paused to glance at David, as if gauging whether the billionaire had any shred of humanity left. David straightened, finally speaking. "I have never forgotten my responsibilities. Everything I've built, everything I've fought for, was to ensure security for my family. You may not like my methods, Johanna, but don't you dare say I've forgotten." She scoffed, shaking her head. "You call lobbying against child labor protections responsibility? You call turning your back on your vows security? Don't twist your sins into virtues, Adrian." The use of his full name, not David, not the familiar pet names she'd once used, cut deeper than any insult. It reminded him of the distance between them now, a canyon that had opened slowly, year by year, until it yawned impossible. The baby whimpered again. Johanna reached down instinctively, soothing Amara with a touch so gentle it silenced the room. David couldn't tear his eyes away. In that moment, every lawyer, every clerk, every shadow in the room disappeared. All he saw was his daughter, tiny, fragile, pure, and the undeniable truth that she would one day ask what kind of man her father had been. The question gnawed at him. What would he answer? That night, as the storm gave way to a hushed city, David returned to his penthouse overlooking Central Park. The building stood tall, its glass facade shimmering with the reflections of lightning. But inside, it was sterile, quiet, cold, almost museum-like. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid swirling in crystal. Yet the whiskey did nothing to steady him. His mind replayed Johanna's words over and over, her accusations laced with truths he had spent years suppressing. He walked to the balcony, staring down at the wet streets below. He remembered another night, years earlier, December 24th, 2016, their first Christmas together. Johanna had surprised him with a second-hand record player she'd restored herself. They had danced barefoot on the rug of his then-modest apartment, Sinatra's voice crooning through the static of old vinyl. He'd held her close and whispered that he didn't care about the billions he was chasing. He cared about her. How far he had strayed from that man. Behind him, his phone buzzed with alerts. News outlets were already ablaze with headlines. Courtroom shock. Billionaire's wife arrives with newborn. Divorce of the century takes dramatic turn. Johanna Budd brings baby into Manhattan trial. His advisors would tell him to spin it, to control the narrative. But for once, David didn't care about the headlines. What haunted him wasn't the press. It was the look in Johanna's eyes, the conviction that he had become unrecognizable to her. He set down his glass, suddenly restless. His gaze drifted to the study, where a leather-bound photo album sat on the shelf, untouched for years. He pulled it down. Flipping through pages filled with wedding pictures, vacations, stolen, candid moments. One photo stopped him cold. Johanna laughing on a vineyard hill in Napa, the sun setting behind her. She had been pregnant with Amara then, though they hadn't known yet. She looked radiant, free, full of life. He remembered snapping that picture himself, joking that he wanted to capture her before she realized how exhausting being his wife could be. For the first time in years, David felt something break open in his chest. A longing, an ache, a recognition that he wasn't just losing a wife, he was losing the only person who had ever truly seen him. Meanwhile, across town, Johanna sat in her modest townhouse, rocking Amara to sleep. Patricia had left hours earlier, advising her to prepare for the next court session with composure and strategy. But Johanna wasn't thinking about strategy now. She was thinking about the look on David's face in court, not the arrogance, not the anger, but the fleeting moment of vulnerability when he saw Amara. She had expected him to remain stone, to treat the baby as another obstacle. But no, his mask had cracked, and that terrified her more than if he'd stayed cold. Because deep down, buried beneath the layers of betrayal, she still remembered the man she had once loved. And if that man still existed, if even a flicker of him remained, then her carefully built walls might crumble. She looked down at Amara, her tiny chest rising and falling. "You deserve better than this," she whispered. "Better than a father who chooses power over love." But if he can find his way back... Her voice broke. She pressed a kiss to the baby's forehead. "God help me. If he can find his way back, I don't know if I'll be strong enough to stop him." The following morning, the city buzzed with speculation. Talk shows debated whether Johanna's courtroom move had been brilliant strategy or emotional manipulation. Shareholders in Budd Industries panicked at the sight of their CEO faltering under public scrutiny. Activists hailed Johanna as a heroine for standing against her husband's empire. And in the midst of it all, the courthouse prepared for round 2. David arrived early, his attorneys briefing him in hushed tones. But unlike yesterday, he wasn't fully listening. His mind was elsewhere, caught between the man he had become and the man he used to be. When Johanna entered, carrying Amara again, their eyes met across the room. For the first time in years, David didn't see an adversary. He saw a mirror reflecting everything he had lost and everything he might still reclaim. The gavel struck, the trial resumed, and the battle for their future truly began. The second day in court began with the sharp crack of the judge's gavel. "All rise," the bailiff announced, his voice echoing through the vaulted chamber. Reporters leaned forward, notebooks poised, cameras angled for every flicker of expression. The world wanted a show, and it was about to get one. David adjusted his tie, his face a mask of composure, but beneath the surface his pulse thrummed unevenly. He could feel Johanna's presence even before he saw her, an aura of calm defiance. When she entered, Amara in her arms, the courtroom collectively inhaled, as though the baby herself carried a verdict no one had yet spoken aloud. The judge glanced at the child, his brow furrowed. "Mrs. Budd, while I respect the symbolic power of your choice, I must ask, do you intend to bring the infant to each proceeding?" "Yes, Your Honor," Johanna said evenly, "because her future is at stake in every word spoken in this room." The judge sighed, tapping his pen against the bench. "Very well, let us proceed. Counsel, your opening arguments for the amended case." Patricia rose gracefully, her tailored suit sharp against the warm wood of the chamber. She stepped into the center, her voice clear, deliberate. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, this is not simply a divorce. This is a reckoning. For years, my client stood by her husband as he built an empire. She supported him, trusted him, defended him, even when his choices contradicted her values. But the revelations of March 18, 2024 changed everything. Documents proving Budd Industries lobbied against child labor protections overseas. Billions saved on the backs of children. And now, Mr. C. Budd wishes to walk away from his marriage as though none of it touches his home, as though the very child you see before you deserves to inherit nothing but his wealth and all of his sins. The words stung. The gallery murmured. Cameras clicked like a drumbeat of judgment. Richard stood next, buttoning his jacket with the air of a man about to tame chaos. "My learned colleague," he began, his tone dripping with feigned civility, "would have you believe that this trial is about corporate policy. It is not. The issue before this court is simple: the dissolution of a marriage broken by irreconcilable differences. Mr. Sabina Budd has acknowledged his obligations to his daughter, financial and otherwise, but let us not confuse moral grandstanding with legal responsibility. This is a divorce, not a referendum on global economics." The judge nodded. "Very well, proceed with evidence." And with that, the storm truly broke. Patricia wasted no time. She introduced emails, board memos signed by David authorizing lobbying payments. She displayed headlines from major outlets. Then came the photographs. David, leaving the London hotel in December 2021, his hand brushing against the woman's arm. The gallery gasped. David clenched his jaw, his knuckles white on the table. He had known this was coming, yet the sting of public exposure cut deeper than he had imagined. Johanna didn't gloat. She didn't even look at him. She simply cradled Amara, rocking her gently, as though shielding the child from the ugliness unraveling around them. That restraint made the images cut even sharper, because David knew her silence spoke louder than any condemnation. Richard countered swiftly, objecting to the relevance of the photographs. Infidelity, alleged or otherwise, does not negate the petitioner's right to divorce. My client is not on trial for his private life. Patricia smirked. Private life? Mr. Sabina Budd is not a private man. He is a public figure whose every action has ripple effects. When his private choices betray public trust, the two cannot be separated. His marriage, his empire, his scandals, they are one story. And this child is part of that story. The judge allowed the evidence, reminding the attorneys to stay tethered to legal implications. But the damage was done. The jury of public opinion had already heard enough. During recess, David retreated to the courthouse's marble corridor, his attorneys swarming him with damage control strategies. But their voices blurred into meaningless noise. He leaned against a pillar, closing his eyes, hearing Johanna's words from the previous day echo in his skull. She deserves better than these papers. He wanted to shout that he wasn't the monster she painted, that every compromise, every ruthless decision had been made to protect what they'd built. But what good were words when the world only saw the villain? He heard footsteps. Opening his eyes, he saw Johanna approaching, Amara in her arms. Patricia was still on the phone with reporters, leaving Johanna unaccompanied. They stopped a few feet apart, the marble floor gleaming between them. "Why are you doing this?" David asked, his voice low, rough. Johanna adjusted the baby. "Because you need to remember that no amount of money will erase the truth. And because one day she'll be old enough to read those headlines herself. What will you tell her then?" He swallowed hard. "That I built an empire to protect her, to give her a future." Her eyes narrowed. "No, you built it to protect yourself, to give you power. Don't confuse the two." The sting of her words left him speechless. Amara stirred, a tiny whimper breaking the tension. Johanna rocked her gently, her voice softening. "She deserves a father she can be proud of. Are you willing to be that man, Adrian?" For the first time in years, he didn't have an answer. Back in the courtroom, Patricia pulled her sharpest weapon yet: witnesses. First came a former Bud Industries executive who testified about meetings where David had dismissed ethical concerns in favor of profits. Then an NGO worker who had documented child labor in factories tied to Bud subsidiaries. Each testimony chipped away at the image David had once carefully cultivated. He was no longer the visionary entrepreneur. He was the profiteer, the man who chose billions over children. Richard tried to dismantle the witnesses, but the momentum had shifted. The gallery leaned toward Johanna's side. The press scribbled furiously. And then Patricia dropped the final bombshell. A video clip of David himself, caught on a leaked Zoom call, saying, "Morality doesn't pay dividends, results do." The courtroom exploded in murmurs. The judge pounded his gavel for order. David sat frozen, his stomach hollow. He remembered that call. It had been late, exhaustion fraying his restraint. He hadn't known it was recorded. He glanced at Johanna. For a moment their eyes locked. Hers were not triumphant. They were sorrowful. She hadn't wanted to destroy him. She had wanted him to admit what he'd become. The realization hit like a blow. This wasn't just her fight. It was his reckoning. That evening, as the court adjourned, the press flooded the steps of the courthouse. Johanna exited first, holding Amara, flashes exploding around her like fireworks. She looked serene, untouchable. Headlines would crown her the victor of the day. David followed minutes later, his security forming a shield. The questions hurled at him were merciless. "Do you admit to funding child labor? Will you resign from Bud Industries? Do you still intend to divorce after today's revelations?" He said nothing, climbing into the limousine. The door shut, silencing the chaos. Inside, darkness enveloped him. He leaned back, exhaling shakily. For the first time, he wondered if he had already lost. Not just the trial, not just Johanna, but the man he had once been. And somewhere in that silence, he heard the faint echo of his daughter's whimper, haunting him like a verdict yet to be delivered. The third day of proceedings dawned with a strange, uneasy calm. The storm that had pummeled Manhattan the day before had cleared, leaving the sky pale and cloudless. But for David Budd, the silence outside only mirrored the dread brewing within. He stood before the bathroom mirror in his penthouse, straightening his tie for the 5th time. The reflection staring back at him looked like a ghost. Tired, worn, his once confident eyes dimmed by 2 days of public crucifixion. Behind him, a television blared headlines he couldn't ignore no matter how hard he tried. Bud Empire faces scrutiny amid divorce drama. Courtroom footage goes viral. Morality doesn't pay dividends. Johanna Budd emerges as symbol of defiance. He switched it off, the silence louder than the noise. Downstairs, his chauffeur was already waiting. David stepped into the limousine, gripping the leather seat with white-knuckled fists. For all his billions, all his empires, he'd never felt so powerless. The courthouse was busier than ever. Television trucks lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Crowds gathered behind barricades, holding homemade signs. Some read "Justice for Johanna." Others carried harsher slogans, "Blood money billionaire." Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. The judge took his seat, eyes already weary. The gavel struck. "Proceed." Patricia stood, her expression composed, but her voice carried a blade. "Your Honor, we have one final witness to present today. Their testimony will directly challenge Mr. Bud's credibility, not just as a husband, but as a businessman and as a father." David stiffened. Richard glanced at him, eyebrows furrowed. They hadn't been told of any additional witnesses. The bailiff opened the side door. Into the courtroom walked a man David hadn't seen in years. Michael Stone, his former chief financial officer. David's stomach plummeted. Michael had been with Bud Industries from the beginning, through the startups, the expansions, the acquisitions. He had been loyal until suddenly, in 2022, he'd resigned without warning, citing health reasons. David had suspected he'd been pressured out by the board, but hadn't bothered to dig deeper. Now, here he was. Patricia guided him to the witness stand. "Mr. Stone, thank you for appearing. Could you please state for the record your role at Bud Industries?" Michael cleared his throat, his voice steady but tinged with weariness. "I was chief financial officer from 2015 until late 2022. And in that role, were you privy to internal financial dealings?" "Yes. Every transaction crossed my desk." David's pulse hammered. He gripped his pen so tightly it threatened to snap. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Stone, can you tell the court why you resigned from Bud Industries?" Michael hesitated, glancing briefly at David, then at the judge. "Because I was asked to bury evidence of illegal contracts, shell companies, and payments tied to operations overseas. And when I refused, I was given no choice but to leave." Gasps swept the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously. The judge leaned forward. Patricia pressed on. "And who instructed you to bury this evidence?" Michael's voice was quiet, but it carried like thunder. "Adrian Bud." David shot to his feet. "That's a lie," he shouted, his voice cracking through the chamber. The judge banged his gavel. "Mr. Bud, sit down or I'll hold you in contempt." David sat, seething, his attorneys whispering frantic reassurances. But nothing could erase the image now painted for the court. The billionaire ordering cover-ups while his CFO walked away in disgust. Johanna didn't move. She didn't gloat. She simply looked at him, eyes filled not with victory, but with something colder. Disappointment. Patricia continued. "Mr. Stone, do you have documentation to support these claims?" Michael nodded, producing a stack of files. "Yes, I kept copies for my own protection." The bailiff delivered the files to the judge. He skimmed the first few pages, his face hardening. "These appear legitimate. They will be entered into evidence." The weight of the blow settled heavy on David's chest. He felt the walls closing in. For years, he had trusted that his empire's skeletons would remain buried. Now, one of his oldest allies was unearthing them for the world to see. Recess was called, but the courtroom didn't relax. Reporters dashed for the phones, spectators buzzed like bees in a hive. David stormed into a side chamber with Richard. "How the hell did they find Stone?" he hissed, pacing like a caged animal. Richard rubbed his temples. "I don't know, but it's damning." If those documents are authentic and they look authentic, you're exposed to more than just a messy divorce. You could be facing criminal charges. David's chest tightened. Criminal charges. The words echoed like a death knell. "What do I do?" he muttered, more to himself than to his lawyer. Richard looked him squarely in the eye. "You fight like hell, or you settle. Quietly, generously. End this before the world gets the full picture." David swallowed hard, his throat dry. Settle? That wasn't who he was. He didn't bend, he didn't break. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was his life unraveling in real time. While David's team scrambled, Johanna sat quietly in a corner room nursing Amara. Patricia reviewed notes beside her, but Johanna's mind wandered. She hadn't known about Michael Stone. Patricia had arranged it without telling her, to preserve the shock. But seeing Michael again had unearthed something unexpected. Pity. Not for Michael, but for Adrian. Because in that moment, when the CFO spoke, when the files were handed over, Johanna had seen something she hadn't in years. Fear in Adrian's eyes. Not arrogance, not calculation. Fear. And it terrified her too, because fear made people desperate. She stroked Amara's tiny hand. "What kind of father are you going to have?" she whispered. Back in court, Richard tried to discredit Michael's testimony. He grilled him on why he had stayed at Bud Industries so long, why he hadn't gone to regulators earlier, whether he had financial motives for revenge. Michael remained calm. "I stayed because I believed the company could change. I left when I realized it couldn't. I didn't go public because I was afraid for my family. But seeing what's happening now, seeing Mrs. Budd stand up in this courtroom, I realized it was time." The jury of public opinion had already chosen sides. But then, just when the weight of defeat pressed hardest, came the twist no one saw coming. Patricia, with a flourish, held up a single document from Michael's files. "Your Honor, this one is particularly relevant to today's proceedings. It concerns not only financial impropriety, but family matters." She approached the bench. The judge reviewed it, eyebrows rising. "Proceed." Patricia turned toward the courtroom. Her voice was slow, deliberate. "This document shows that in February of 2022, while Mr. Budd and my client were separated, Mr. Budd established a trust fund for a child born overseas." A stunned hush fell over the room. David's breath caught. Patricia continued, her eyes locking on him. "A child who is not Amara." The gallery gasped, flashes erupted, whispers surged. Johanna froze, her face blanching. She looked at Adrian as if seeing him for the first time all over again. The judge's gavel pounded. "Order. Order in this court." But the damage was done. The twist had landed. David Budd, billionaire, husband, father, was accused of having another child. And the courtroom, the marriage, the empire, all of it tilted on the edge of collapse. The sound inside the courtroom was a living thing. An avalanche of whispers, camera shutters, and gasps colliding until the judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order! I will have order in this court." But no one was listening. The revelation had detonated like a bomb. Johanna sat frozen at the defense table, Amara in her arms, her eyes locked on Adrian. She wanted to deny it. Wanted to believe Patricia had misread, that Michael Stone had exaggerated, that this was some cruel ploy. But Adrian's face told her everything. The tightening jaw, the flicker in his eyes, the silence that screamed louder than any denial. Her throat went dry. She whispered to herself, "My God." The judge banged his gavel again. "Mr. Budd, do you wish to respond to this claim?" Every lens turned toward him, every pen waited. Adrian rose slowly. His palms sweated despite the chill of the chamber. His attorneys tugged at his sleeve, whispering for him to sit, to wait, to deny. But his mind raced faster than his body could obey. "This is irrelevant to today's proceedings," he said, voice clipped, brittle. "It has no bearing on my divorce." The gallery erupted again, the hypocrisy ringing through the air. Patricia's lips curved in a knife-edged smile. "Irrelevant? A secret trust for a child conceived during your separation? A child you've never disclosed to this court?" "I think not." The judge raised a brow. "Is this claim accurate, Mr. Budd?" Adrian hesitated. That hesitation was enough. The silence became his confession. Johanna's world tilted sideways. She clutched Amara tighter, as though shielding her from the poisonous air. In her ears, Patricia's words replayed, "A child who is not Amara." The betrayal she had endured in 2021, the scandal of the hotel photographs, the lobbying revelations, none of it compared to this. This was not just adultery, this was legacy. This was another life bound to him in secrecy. She remembered late nights in 2022 when they were separated, how Adrian had gone silent for days, unreachable even to his attorneys. She had assumed it was business or self-pity. Now she wondered if those days had been something else. Someone else. Her stomach churned. She wanted to scream, to curse him in front of the world. But Amara stirred against her, whimpering, and Johanna swallowed the rage, rocking her child back to sleep. Patricia leaned down, whispering, "This changes everything. We can leverage this, Johanna." But Johanna wasn't thinking like a lawyer. She was thinking like a woman who had been gutted. During recess, chaos spilled into the marble hallways. Reporters swarmed like vultures, shouting questions, shoving microphones toward anyone who passed. "Mr. Budd, do you confirm the second child exists? Mrs. Budd, did you know about this trust? Who is the mother of the overseas child?" Security fought to clear paths. The courthouse steps became a battlefield of speculation. Inside a private chamber, Adrian faced his attorneys. Richard slammed his hand on the table. "Why the hell didn't you tell us about this?" Adrian's voice cracked. "Because it wasn't supposed to matter. It was handled. Quietly, years ago." Richard's jaw tightened. "Handled? You've just detonated your own credibility. If this document is real, we're not just fighting a divorce anymore. We're fighting to keep you out of jail for perjury. Do you understand?" Adrian buried his face in his hands. He could still picture the woman's face, the London venture capitalist. He hadn't loved her, not in any real sense. It had been reckless, a way to escape the suffocating silence of his separation. He had thought the matter closed when he'd set up the trust. Out of sight, out of mind, until now. Meanwhile, in the defense chamber, Johanna stared blankly at the wall, Patricia's voice a faint buzz in her ears. "You've got him cornered now," Patricia said. "This proves not only infidelity, but deceit. The judge will take this into account for custody, assets, everything. We can demand nearly anything." But Johanna wasn't listening. She was replaying her wedding day, July 14th, 1918, the vows he had whispered beneath the Santorini sunset. "It's you, always you. Nothing else matters?" What a lie? Her chest ached as though something vital had been ripped from her. She looked down at Amara, who slept peacefully, blissfully unaware. "It's you and me now," she whispered. "We'll survive him. Whatever he's done, we'll survive him." Still, deep inside, a dangerous thought gnawed. Was this the final betrayal? Or just another piece of the puzzle she'd never wanted to solve? When court resumed, the judge addressed the room with gravity. "This court will not speculate on the veracity of the claim regarding a second child until it is fully investigated. However, the omission of such information, if true, calls into question the petitioner's transparency. Mr. Budd, you will produce all records related to this matter by tomorrow. Adrian nodded stiffly, his pride shriveled. Patricia seized the momentum. Your Honor, given this revelation, it is imperative that we pause proceedings to allow a full forensic accounting of Mr. Budd's assets and obligations. This includes identifying any other undisclosed trusts or dependents. The judge agreed, scheduling a temporary halt. The trial would resume in 2 days, pending evidence. As the gavel struck, the gallery erupted again. That night, Adrian wandered his penthouse like a prisoner in his own kingdom. The city glimmered below, indifferent to his downfall. He poured another drink, but it didn't burn away the shame. He stared at the skyline and whispered to himself, "What have I done?" He saw Johanna's face in his mind, not angry, not even furious, but hollow, disappointed beyond words. That look haunted him more than the scandal itself. And then, Amara's face, so small, so pure. Would she ever forgive him? Would she even want to know him when she learned the truth? His phone buzzed with a message. Unknown number. He opened it. Stop fighting her, tell the truth. Or I will. No signature, no context, but he knew exactly who it was. The mother of the other child. Across town, Johanna sat in her dimly lit townhouse, Amara finally asleep in her crib. Patricia had gone home, leaving her with silence. She poured herself tea she couldn't drink, staring out the window at the rain-streaked glass. Her mind replayed the day's revelations in a relentless loop. Another child, another life, another betrayal. But as anger bubbled, something else crept in, fear. If Adrian had kept this secret for years, what else had he hidden? And if another child existed, what did that mean for Amara's future? Would she grow up sharing her father's legacy with a half-sibling she'd never met? Would she inherit his sins along with his fortune? Johanna pressed her palms to her face, exhausted. For years, she had fought for justice in courtrooms, for clients who had been wronged. Now, she was living the case she never wanted. She whispered to the night, "How do you fight a man who built an empire out of lies?" The next morning, the newspapers were merciless. Secret child rocks Budd divorce. From billionaire to bigamist, Johanna Budd betrayed again. Talk shows speculated about the identity of the other mother. Analysts debated the financial implications of multiple heirs. Activists pointed to the scandal as proof of Adrian's moral bankruptcy. For the first time, even Budd Industries' stock began to slide. Adrian sat in his study, staring at the falling numbers on his laptop. Billions evaporating overnight. His empire bleeding because of a secret he thought buried. And in that moment he realized the truth Patricia had spoken in court. This wasn't just about money. This was about legacy. He slammed the laptop shut, fury coursing through him. "I will not lose everything," he muttered. But deep down he knew he already had. The morning broke heavy with humidity, the kind that clung to the skin like a warning. Manhattan was restless. Newspapers screamed scandal. Talk shows replayed courtroom footage on an endless loop, and Budd Industries' stock continued its slow, bleeding decline. Adrian stood at his penthouse window, staring at the headlines scrolling across the ticker on the building opposite. Budd Empire faces succession crisis. Secret child could claim heirship. Wife holds baby as husband stays silent. He closed the curtains, shutting out the noise. But the silence inside was worse. It was the silence of a man cornered. On his desk lay a manila envelope, unmarked but familiar. It had been delivered by courier in the early hours, slipped past security with the precision of someone who knew how to reach him. He hadn't opened it yet. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what it contained. Proof. Proof of the child he'd tried to bury in secrecy. Proof that would burn him alive if it ever saw the inside of that courtroom. And then there was the text. "Stop fighting her. Tell the truth, or I will." The mother of that child hadn't just resurfaced. She had declared war. Across town, Johanna dressed carefully, her motions sharp, deliberate. She slid Amara into a soft carrier, kissing her forehead before heading toward Patricia's waiting car. Patricia, already juggling 2 phones, gave her a quick glance. The judge is furious. He's demanding full disclosure today. Adrian's team will try to spin this as irrelevant, but the court won't buy it. We're pressing for disclosure of all assets and heirs, legitimate or not. This is the moment we take control. Johanna nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She wasn't just thinking about disclosure or assets. She was thinking about the girl or boy, wherever they were, whose existence had been hidden like contraband. Another child. Another life that had been forced into the shadows while Adrian lived like a king. The thought made her chest tighten. What if it's true, Patricia? What if there really is another baby? Patricia's eyes softened briefly. Then, Johanna, the question isn't what if. The question is, what do you do when your husband's sins outnumber his truths? Johanna looked out the window, Amara's soft breathing against her chest. She already knew her answer. The courtroom was electric when Adrian entered, his attorneys surrounding him like armor. Johanna was already seated, Amara asleep in her arms, Patricia calm but sharp as glass. The judge wasted no time. "Mr. Budd, yesterday this court was presented with allegations of a second child born during your separation in 2022. I ordered you to provide documentation today. Do you have it?" The air was a held breath. Adrian's attorney, Richard, rose. "Your Honor, we have reviewed the claims. While Mr. Budd acknowledges the existence of a trust established in 2022, we contest its relevance to these proceedings. The trust was established during a legal separation. Furthermore, no paternity has been proven in court." The gallery erupted in murmurs. The judge banged his gavel. "Order!" He turned to Adrian. "Is this accurate, Mr. Budd? Did you establish this trust?" Adrian hesitated. He could feel Johanna's eyes burning through him. Slowly, he rose. "Yes, Your Honor. I established it." The room exploded. Reporters scribbling, cameras flashing, the gallery whispering like wildfire. Johanna's breath caught. Even though she had suspected, even though she had prepared herself, hearing him say it out loud was a knife twisting in her chest. The judge's voice cut through the noise. "And for whom was this trust established?" Adrian's throat tightened. "For a child born to someone else during our separation." Silence fell like a blade. Johanna closed her eyes, holding Amara closer. She could feel the courtroom spinning around her, the whispers of strangers dissecting her life, her pain, her marriage, but none of it mattered. What mattered was the truth laid bare at last. Patricia rose swiftly. "Your Honor, this is not just about financial disclosure. This is about character. Mr. Budd has proven himself dishonest, deceitful, and unworthy of sole custody or primary decision-making rights for Amara. My client cannot, in good conscience, leave her daughter in the hands of a man who hides children like liabilities on a balance sheet." Adrian bristled, his voice rising. "That is not fair." The judge cut him off. "Mr. Budd, you will remain silent unless addressed." Adrian sat, his fists clenched so tightly the blood drained from his knuckles. When recess was called, Adrian slipped out the side door, his attorneys trailing after him. But before he could reach the corridor, a figure stepped from the shadows of the hallway. Her presence stopped him cold. The mother. She was younger than Johanna, sharp-featured, her hair tied back in a severe bun. She wore no smile, no expression at all, only the hard resolve of someone who had waited too long to be silent. "Hello, Adrian," she said softly. His attorney stiffened. This is not the place. But Adrian silenced them with a raised hand. His voice was low, strained. "What are you doing here?" Her lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. "Making sure you don't forget. You thought a check could erase me, erase us. But here we are." He swallowed hard. "Not here, not like this." "Then tell her," she snapped, glancing toward the courtroom doors. "Tell Johanna everything, because if you don't, I will." And then she was gone, disappearing into the sea of reporters before he could respond. Adrian stood frozen, his world tilting. The walls he had built for years were crumbling faster than he could rebuild them. Back inside, Johanna watched him return to his seat, his face pale, his jaw clenched. Something had happened in the hallway. She could see it in his eyes. She wondered if it was another lie forming, another secret waiting to detonate. Patricia leaned close. "We have him. Don't let him rattle you. Whatever he's hiding, it's about to surface." Johanna nodded, but her heart ached. She wasn't thinking of victory. She was thinking of Amara, of the child in London, of the tangled web of lives Adrian had spun with his ambition and recklessness. And for the first time, she wondered if there was even anything left to salvage. The judge reconvened, his voice firm. "This court will order a full investigation into the alleged second child, including DNA testing if necessary. Until that time, Mr. Budd's credibility remains in serious question. Proceedings are adjourned until further notice." The gavel fell. The courtroom erupted again. Reporters surged forward. Security scrambled. But Johanna barely heard any of it. She stared at Adrian, their eyes locking across the chaos. For the first time, she didn't see her husband, her partner, or even her betrayer. She saw a man stripped bare, cornered, desperate, haunted by ghosts of his own making, and she realized something chilling. The trial wasn't just about their marriage anymore. It was about who would survive Adrian Budd's empire of lies. The next 48 hours crawled like years. Manhattan was ablaze with speculation. Every news outlet, every podcast, every late-night show tore into the scandal with ravenous hunger. Billionaire's secret heir? Is Amara the only child, or one of many? The fall of Adrian Budd. Outside Budd Industries headquarters. Protesters gathered with signs. "Children aren't currency." Shareholders whispered of emergency board meetings. Politicians distanced themselves from Adrian as though he carried plague. And in the middle of it all, two women, one in a quiet townhouse in Harlem, the other in a sleek flat in London, prepared to collide in a way neither had imagined. Johanna rocked Amara to sleep in her crib, the hum of a lullaby catching in her throat. Her lawyer, Patricia, sat across the room with her laptop, scrolling through the latest filings. "They're calling for full disclosure of Budd's personal accounts," Patricia said, her tone matter of fact. "If he fights it, he risks contempt. If he complies, who knows what else will surface. Either way, this is the leverage we needed." Johanna nodded absently, her gaze fixed on Amara. The baby's chest rose and fell, each breath fragile, precious. "Leverage," Johanna murmured. "Is that what this is? Because it feels like destruction." Patricia closed the laptop. Destruction can be a form of justice. Johanna looked up, her eyes sharp. And what about the other child? What justice does that baby get? Born in secret, hidden away, bought off with a trust fund. Patricia exhaled, softening her voice. That's not your fight, Johanna. Your fight is here for Amara. But Johanna wasn't sure she believed that, because no matter how much rage churned in her, a part of her still ached for the unnamed, unseen child across the ocean. A half-sibling her daughter might one day discover, and the thought terrified her. Meanwhile, Adrian sat in the boardroom of Bud Industries, the empire he had built, now a fortress under siege. His attorneys spread out files like shields, while his PR team drafted statements that sounded more like apologies than defenses. The investigation is already underway, Richard said, his voice clipped. The court has ordered DNA testing. You'll have to comply. Adrian pinched the bridge of his nose. And if it's true, Richard stared at him. Isn't it? Adrian didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was enough. A PR executive leaned forward. We can try to spin this. Frame it as a personal failing during separation. Emphasize that you provided for the child responsibly, that you didn't abandon them. The public might forgive an affair. What they won't forgive is hypocrisy. Adrian slammed his fist against the table, startling everyone. Do you think I care about forgiveness? He roared. This isn't about spin. This is about losing everything. My company, my family, my name. The room went silent. For the first time, his team saw not the untouchable billionaire, but a man crumbling beneath the weight of his own lies. 2 days later, the courtroom was more crowded than ever. The gallery buzzed, anticipation thick. The judge entered, his face grave. The court has received preliminary reports regarding the alleged second child. We will review them today. David, Adrian, sat rigid at the plaintiff's table, every muscle taut. Across from him, Johanna held Amara close, her face pale but composed. The clerk handed the judge a sealed envelope. He opened it slowly, scanning the contents. The silence in the room stretched, unbearable. Finally, the judge spoke. The reports confirm that Mr. Budd did, in fact, establish a trust in February 2022 for a child born to a Ms. Eleanor Voss residing in London. Furthermore, DNA testing establishes a 99.7% probability that Mr. Budd is the biological father of said child. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, cameras flashing like lightning. Johanna's breath caught. She gripped Amara tighter, her knuckles white. Her eyes burned, but she refused to look at Adrian. She couldn't. The judge's voice rose above the chaos. This revelation raises significant questions regarding Mr. Abud's credibility and obligations. It will weigh heavily in this court's final determination of custody and division of assets. Adrian sat frozen, his mind numb. The truth was no longer a secret. It was public record, carved into history. During recess, the courthouse steps became a frenzy. Reporters shoved microphones into Johanna's face, shouting questions. Mrs. Budd, will you allow Amara to meet her half-sibling? Do you feel vindicated? Do you still love your husband? She said nothing, shielding Amara from the flashes. Patricia ushered her into a waiting car. Inside, Johanna finally allowed herself to breathe. But the relief was hollow. The truth was out, yes, but what did it change? Adrian was still Amara's father, and now another child bore his name, his blood, his sins. Patricia touched her arm gently. You've won, Johanna. Don't forget that. But Johanna wasn't sure she wanted victory if it meant building her daughter's future on another child's ruin. That night, Adrian returned to his penthouse. He poured a drink, but it sat untouched. He stared at the envelope on his desk. The one Eleanor had sent days earlier. He hadn't opened it. He hadn't needed to. Now, with the world closing in, he tore it open. Inside was a single photograph. A little girl, maybe 2 years old. Dark hair, bright eyes, his eyes. On the back, in Eleanor's sharp handwriting, were 3 words. She deserves better. Adrian's chest constricted. He sank into the chair, the photo trembling in his hands. For the first time in his life, tears burned his eyes. Not for his empire, not for his reputation, but for the children, both of them, who would one day know what kind of man their father had been. The next morning, Johanna received her own envelope. It wasn't from Patricia or the court, but from someone she hadn't expected. Eleanor Voss. Inside was a letter. Johanna, you don't know me, but I know you. I never meant to be part of your life. I never wanted to. But Adrian's choices made that impossible. I have a daughter, our daughter, and she is innocent in all of this. I brought her into the world during a time when Adrian claimed his marriage was over. He promised me nothing, and I asked for nothing, but I will not let her grow up a secret. You don't owe me anything. But one day, Amara will want to know who her sister is. When that day comes, I hope we can do better than Adrian ever did. For them, not for us. Eleanor Johanna read the letter twice, her hands trembling. She looked over at Amara, babbling softly in her crib, and felt her chest tighten. A sister. Amara had a sister, and Johanna, betrayed, broken, furious, suddenly found herself facing a question she hadn't expected. Could she hate Adrian, yet still honor the bond between his daughters? Back in court, Patricia prepared for closing arguments. The trial was nearly over, but the outcome already seemed certain. Adrian's credibility was in tatters. His empire shook. His family lay in ruins. And Johanna had become the symbol of defiance, of dignity under fire. Yet, as she looked at Adrian across the courtroom, she didn't see a defeated billionaire. She saw a man haunted, hollowed, unraveling. And for the first time, she felt not rage, but pity. Because in the end, Adrian wasn't just losing his fortune or his marriage, he was losing himself. And that was the greatest tragedy of all. The judge announced a recess until final verdicts could be read the following week. The gavel fell, and the trial of the century neared its end. But for Adrian and Johanna, the real verdict loomed beyond the courthouse, etched into the faces of 2 innocent children who would one day demand the truth. The week between hearings felt like purgatory. For Johanna, each day was a cycle of exhaustion and reflection. She rose early, fed Amara, answered reporters with silence, and let Patricia handle the noise. But in the quiet moments, when Amara's small fingers curled around hers, when the city slept, Johanna wrestled with questions that had no clean answers. Was justice about winning custody, dismantling Adrian's empire, and ensuring Amara grew up untouched by his sins? Or was justice about something harder, something quieter, choosing not to let his failures define their daughter's future? The letter from Eleanor Voss still lay on her nightstand. Some nights she read it again, her heart aching at the thought of another child caught in Adrian's orbit. The words, "Amara will want to know who her sister is," rang truer with each passing day. For Adrian, the days blurred into a haze of dread. His attorneys prepared appeals, his PR team drafted apologies, but none of it pierced the fog. He was a man watching his empire collapse in slow motion. Shareholders demanded his resignation, allies vanished, lawsuits multiplied. But none of that haunted him as much as 2 images. The photo of his London daughter and the face of Amara in court, asleep in Johanna's arms, blissfully unaware of the chaos surrounding her. Those were his legacies now. Not the skyscrapers or the stock tickers. 2 daughters. 2 futures he had nearly destroyed before they began. April 19th, 2025. The courthouse was packed to suffocation. Spectators filled every bench, reporters stood shoulder to shoulder, cameras lined the back wall like rifles poised for execution. The air was electric, every breath steeped in anticipation. The judge entered, his gavel striking once. "We are here to deliver the court's determinations in the matter of Bud versus Bud." Johanna's heart pounded. She sat tall, Amara asleep against her shoulder. Patricia placed a steadying hand on her arm. Adrian sat across the aisle, his suit immaculate, but his face pale. Carved by sleepless nights. For the first time, he didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man stripped bare. The judge adjusted his glasses and began. On the matter of dissolution, this court grants Johanna Budd primary custody of the minor child, Amara Budd, with Mr. Budd granted visitation rights under supervision until further review. Mr. Budd's demonstrated lack of transparency, his misconduct, and the revelations of another child weigh heavily against granting him primary responsibility. A ripple of murmurs swept the gallery. Johanna's throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes. Custody. Her daughter was safe. The judge continued. On the matter of financial distribution, given Mr. Budd's concealment of significant assets and trusts, this court awards Mrs. Budd 40% of shared marital assets, in addition to a trust established solely for Amara's welfare, insulated from Budd Industries' ongoing legal challenges. Adrian exhaled shakily, the sound catching in his chest. Billions, gone. But he didn't fight it, he didn't even flinch. And then came the final blow. On the matter of character, this court strongly recommends that federal regulators review Budd Industries' practices in light of evidence presented here. While not within this court's jurisdiction, the implications are too serious to ignore. The gavel fell. This case is concluded. The courtroom erupted, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing like a storm. Patricia hugged Johanna, murmuring, "It's over. You did it." But Johanna didn't feel victorious. She felt hollow, as though the verdict had carved something out of her. She looked across the aisle at Adrian. Their eyes met. His filled not with anger, but with a sorrow so deep it startled her. For a moment, she almost pitied him. Almost. The courthouse steps were a battlefield. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust. Questions screamed. "Mrs. Budd, how do you feel?" "Mr. Budd, do you admit guilt?" "What about the London child?" Johanna shielded Amara, walking steadily toward the waiting car. She said nothing, but her silence carried more weight than words. Adrian followed minutes later, flanked by security. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Budd, do you have a message for your daughters?" He froze. For once, he didn't think of strategy, optics, or spin. He thought only of them, Amara, with her wide, trusting eyes, and the little girl in the photo Eleanor had sent. He turned toward the cameras, his voice raw. "Yes, my message is, I will do better. I don't know how yet, but I will." The words weren't polished. They weren't rehearsed. They were the closest thing to truth he had spoken in years. That night, Johanna sat in her townhouse, Amara asleep in her crib, the city quiet outside. Patricia had gone, leaving her alone with the silence. She poured tea, her hands trembling slightly, and opened Eleanor's letter again. She whispered to herself, "For them, not for us." Her eyes closed, and for the first time in months she allowed herself to breathe. The fight was over, but the journey, the harder journey, was just beginning. Because one day Amara would ask. One day she would want to know about her sister. And when that day came, Johanna would choose truth over bitterness, for Amara's sake, for the sake of both girls. She glanced at the photo Eleanor had sent. Two little girls, unknowingly bound by blood, waiting for the adults to decide if they would be enemies or sisters. Johanna whispered, "We'll do better than him. We have to." Meanwhile, Adrian walked alone through his penthouse, the walls echoing with emptiness. The empire he had built was crumbling, his fortune bleeding, his name in ruins. But none of it mattered. On his desk lay two photographs, one of Amara, asleep in court, and one of the London child, smiling at the camera with his eyes. For the first time, Adrian understood. His legacy wasn't steel, glass, or stock tickers. It was flesh and blood. Two daughters who deserved a father they could be proud of. He whispered into the quiet, "I will do better." And for once, he meant it. The world would remember April 12, 2025, as the day the billionaire walked into court with divorce papers and faltered when faced with his newborn daughter. But for Johanna, the real story was not about the trial, the scandal, or the verdict. It was about survival, about protecting Amara, about refusing to let one man's empire of lies define her child's future. And for Adrian, the real story was not about his fall, but about the chance, slim, fragile, but real, to rebuild not his empire, but himself. In the end, history would record the scandals, the betrayals, the headlines. But in two quiet homes, one in Harlem, one in London, two little girls slept peacefully, unaware of the storm they had survived. And in that silence, hope stirred. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come with applause or headlines. Sometimes it comes in the quiet vow of a broken man whispering to his daughters, "I will do better."